Molly.
Hey, Mrs. Cannon, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going good. Is everything okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to call and ask you something really quick. This clown statue, I was wondering if I could cover it because it's really scaring the kids.
Molly, we don't have any kids. Take the clown statue and get out of the house.
Oh my god.
That was great.
What a spooky opener to our Spooktacular.
So scary.
Aleta, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm very excited about the actual stack of notes that you have prepared.
We have 5 pages.
Because when it comes to spooks and ghouls and goobers and haints, we want to get the facts straight.
We still cite our sources.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah. We have prepared for you this evening several Tennessee-centric ghost stories to give you chills and thrills about the state where we live. But before that, I have had Aleta on the show before, and my original intention was to ask her about the ghost hunting that goes on within her own family. Yeah. And somehow we never got around to that topic, even though it's insanely interesting. But Aleta, could you tell me about your dad and how he's into getting spooked?
Yeah, we were too busy talking about squishmallows and daddy's dogs last time, but
yeah.
So my dad, Mark Cannon, he has done ghost hunting individually and with groups for probably, I can't remember exactly how many years, but it's been close to, if not over 15 years. He's always been interested in stuff like that. Growing up, he was super into horror movies, really interested in things like that, and I think he had some experiences when he was younger that just made him kind of wonder, like, what's out there, and, like, want to know more about it. I mean, he's always been pretty open-minded to stuff, and I feel like as he's met other people with, like, similar interests, he's been parts of groups and stuff, and they've done, like, group investigations, and he used to listen to, like, the late-night radio shows where people would call in and talk about, a lot of it was, like, UFO type stuff, but they would also talk just about, like, weird experiences that they'd had, or, like, encounters that they'd had, and things like that. But, yeah, he's done investigations in people's homes. He's done investigations, like, in, like, not, like, businesses that are open, but, like, places that used to be, like, schools or hospitals or things like that. He's either been asked or gotten permission to go investigate, and so he has, like, certain equipment, like, he has, like, the Ovulus thing, or I think I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. And, like, he's done, like, the Estes method and things like that, which he thinks is extra fun because his first name is actually Estes. So, he's like, oh, it's my method. But, so, yeah, him and my Aunt Ellen and her husband Michael, they have a group that goes every so often. There for a while, they went to the Octagon House in Franklin, Kentucky a lot.
Okay.
And investigated. They record video and audio, and then they have a Facebook page that they post to. He's kind of just been doing it for a while, and he really enjoys it, and he loves to talk about it. He's very open to hearing other people's experiences and talking about his own.
Do you think that he's doing it as kind of like a search for proof? Or do you think that, he fully knows that ghosts are real. Yeah. He's maybe just trying to, like, make contact or something.
Yeah. I don't even necessarily, like, a lot of stuff, like, I think he approaches it from the place of, like, if it can be debunked, let's use, like, our critical thinking skills here. Like, if there's an explanation for something, like, he's not going to immediately assume, oh, this place is very haunted or whatever. I think he likes the contact when he's able to get, because, I mean, it's interesting, like, to him that you're able to have, like, a moment of connection with someone that's no longer, like, physically here. I think being respectful of it is a big part of it, too. He's not, like, Zach Bagans out here trying to, like, pick fights with...
In his Ed Hardy t-shirt?
Yeah, Dad does not own any Ed Hardy.
Good.
Thankfully. But yeah, I think he's just really interested in it, and he comes from just a place of, like, genuine interest, which is cool.
Has he worked with people who have maybe asked him to come over to, like, fix a potential problem that they've been experiencing, like, maybe in their home or their business or something?
Yeah. I don't think he's been asked to, like, necessarily fix any issues that people have had. A lot of, like, the in-home stuff that he's done, or, like, where he's been asked to come somewhere and investigate, it's more like the people have wanted to know, like I'm not crazy, right? Like, there's something happening here, or if there is a reason otherwise that's not, like, paranormal related, like, what is causing this? And so he's never been asked to, like, necessarily cleanse a space or anything like that. I mean, but most of the time it's people that want proof.
Yeah. I could imagine that would probably feel amazing to have proof of that, especially maybe you're in a family or you have a group of friends that just think that it's a joke.
Yeah.
When, you know, honestly, sometimes it's really not. Like, I couldn't imagine being in a situation like that where, especially like the place where you live and you exist in every day, you are experiencing something that no one else is seeing or hearing, or maybe sometimes they are, and they just refuse to admit that anything is going on. That would drive me crazy.
Yeah. And I think it's probably... probably has to be validating for someone to show you, like, audio or video evidence of, like, what they experienced in your house, because they use, like, voice recorders so that they get, like, MP3 audio of everything, and then also they just use just their phones and stuff and record things. Like, he sent me videos that he's just recorded on his phone before, and so I think it would probably feel validating, you know, to have, like, here's your evidence. I mean, obviously not everybody's gonna believe it. Somebody's like, oh, like, that footage is doctored or whatever, and it's like, well, my dad has a very old iPhone, and I mean, love him to death, but he's not doctoring any footage of anything.
He doesn't know how to do that.
No. I've never had, like, a crazy experience myself. Like, I've never had an experience where I was like, okay, that was definitely something, like, like a ghost or whatever. And I imagine that would feel a little isolating because, you know, just the average person doesn't tend to believe in that kind of thing. So
is there a specific case that comes to mind where you feel like your dad, like, really got a lot out of it?
It actually can't be accessed anymore, but it's, like, an abandoned school in Jamestown, Tennessee. I can't remember what the school's called. Like I said, it's not open anymore, and now they don't let people go because people were vandalizing it. But he had some pretty, I think, dramatic things happen there. He's been in a place where someone has been, like, scratched or physically harmed before, and I think stuff like that is, like, so that would be hard to forget. And then something that comes to mind just for me that he sent me, I would have to find it. It's in the archive of Facebook Messenger. But he went to a cemetery in my hometown and did an investigation and recorded for a while there. And they had a flashlight sitting by a statue of Jesus that was in the cemetery. And he was communicating with someone, presumably, and asking them to alter the flashlight functions. And they did. like, repeatedly. And so, stuff like that, like, that he sent me videos of, sticks out in my mind, because I'm like, that's crazy. I mean, yeah, flashlights can crap out at any time or whatever, but I feel like, you know, it can only happen so many times before it's like, what the heck, you know?
The call and response is always cool. Like,
yeah,
you know, you ask someone a question and they can give you yes or no answers.
Yeah.
By blinking the light on and off, stuff like that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Do things kind of fall into his lap? Or does he, like, search for things? Or does he kind of have a reputation now as being someone who's willing to come out and look around?
I think it's a mixture. I mean, he's, like, by no means, like, a huge name or anything. But, like, people locally know him. And that's how he got asked to do, like, the in-home investigations that he's done. And our town, Livingston, they do this event every year called Falloween, which is basically like, I think it's all day, but it's kind of like a giant trunk or treat situation for kids. And then they have like an after dark portion, which is more like for older kids and adults, and like they show a movie and they have like people perform and stuff. And then he was a speaker at that a few years ago, and someone that I think she works at the Chamber of Commerce asked him to speak at that. So he was really excited about that, and they got to set up a tent, and they brought like all their gear and put it out, and like if anybody had any questions about it, like they would talk to him and like explain what did what, and had like free stuff to give away. So I think that was really fun. So yes and no, like he seeks some of it out, like the Octagon Hall in Kentucky. That's somewhere he found and wanted to go, and then like he developed a relationship with the owners of the house, and so they had like a chain of communication going where, you know, like, oh yeah, like we want to come then, like sure, and then certain people like might hear of him through someone else that he knows, and like, oh hey, like he does this, and so he might get contacted that way. So it's kind of a mixture of stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of Birmingham, Alabama, I know that we were just going to talk about Tennessee things, but there is a really killer UFO story out of Birmingham.
I did not know this.
So I'm going to share that right now.
Okay.
So there is a man in Alabama. He's a punk musician. He's traveled a lot, and he's been a musician like forever. This happened in the 90s.
Okay.
He was at an event in Huntsville, which is about an hour and 30 minutes away from Birmingham. And he was there with his then girlfriend. And before he was about to leave, one of his bandmates says, hey, be careful on your way home, because there's supposed to be a pretty bad like fog bank. Like the visibility is going to be really poor.
Yeah.
And it was about 1:30 in the morning whenever they got out on the road, and there were really no other cars. And if there was a car, it was usually like an 18-wheeler or something, like a long-haul trucker type deal. There wasn't really anyone out. And this is a drive that he has made dozens and dozens of times. And so, like, he wasn't too concerned about it. But the fog, he said, was unlike anything he had seen. Like, it just kept going. And this is, you know, like a 90-plus mile trip.
Yeah.
But eventually the highway, he gets off and gets on this like 2-lane road for a time, and they're the only ones out there until they spot these headlights in the far distance. But as they get closer, they realize it's not two separate cars. It is a car that has been flipped on its side. And he slows down and sees this like dark SUV, and he described it as being like right off the showroom floor. Like it looked brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And there really wasn't a scratch on it, even though it had visibly been in an accident. There were no dents. All the lights were on in the vehicle. The engine was still running. The interior lights were on in the car, and the windshield wipers were on, front and back. And what bothered him the most was the driver's side door was open, kind of like defying gravity. And he and his girlfriend get out of the car and look around because, you know, this is a huge accident. Maybe someone needs help.
Mm-hmm.
They look around. No one is there. No one is nearby. They call out. No one answers. And the girlfriend just has a really bad feeling about it, and she wants to leave, and he agrees. And, you know, this was in, like, 1995. Neither of them had a cell phone. They couldn't call in for help. So they get back in the car, and they drive about, like, another 10 minutes down the road. And they see another set of taillights, which through this time, this whole 10 minutes, no other vehicles go by. And this car, they realize it is flipped upside down on its top.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like this other car. There's really nothing wrong with it other than that it has been turned upside down. Mm-hmm. The lights are on, the engine is running, the doors are open to the vehicle, and the windshield wipers are on. And they don't get out of the car this time because they're very uncomfortable. Like, mm-hmm. something is weird about this. And so he rolls down the passenger side window and he tells his girlfriend, you know, like, yell out if anyone's there. And they get no response. And she's like, please, let's go. Yeah. We need to leave. And so they keep driving. And eventually they start seeing these white things in the road. Like little, like, I don't know, this is very specific, but like the size of like a Snapple lid.
Oh.
Like a 50-cent piece, but youngins don't know what those are anymore. So that's the size I would say. Little white things, almost like hail or like gravel.
Yeah.
And they slow down because there's this weird kind of sound. And they just come to a stop. They roll down their windows and they realize that each little white thing is a little frog. And there's probably hundreds of thousands of them. Like, all over this road. And they're just hanging out. They're not going to move. They're just there.
Yeah.
And they kind of sit for a second to process what they're seeing. But, and he felt bad about it. He's like, you know, I'm an animal lover. I did not want to run over these frogs, but we needed to leave.
Yeah.
And it was not natural, what we were seeing.
Yeah.
And so he puts his foot on the gas and goes, and he can feel them underneath the tires. And it continues like that for 4 miles of frogs.
4 miles of frogs.
4 miles of frogs.
Oh my god.
And, you know, his girlfriend is like freaking the fuck out.
Well, yeah.
And she's like sobbing, and he is getting really, really upset.
Yeah, this is like worst case scenario.
Yeah. And so basically he makes a deal with her and says, as soon as we reach a gas station, we're getting out of the car and just like reevaluating things.
Yeah.
And honestly, he said, I wanted to find a gas station to prove that there were still people around. Because there was no one else for well over an hour. And so they make it to a gas station, and there are people. They get off the road, there's other people there. And he said, the first thing I wanted to do was to check the state of my car. Because I knew it would be covered in crap.
Yeah.
And he gets out, and it's spotless.
Okay.
There's no proof of anything there.
Weird.
And so he looks at his girlfriend, and they both kind of silently understand that they probably encountered, what was left of, like, maybe a spaceship coming through, some aliens hanging out in the area. I would like to imagine that maybe, like, after these ships come through and, take these people out of their cars, after picking them up off of the road, maybe there was, like, some kind of energy or, like, frequency or vibration or sound that had drawn these frogs out.
Yeah.
But if there's no physical evidence on the vehicle, it makes you wonder, like, what that was.
Yeah, that's really weird. I've never heard of, like, that I can think of anything to do with UFO that involved animals, but I have to imagine, animals usually are pretty sensitive to stuff like that, regardless of what they are. But for there to not be any, like, evidence of what they just drove through was very freaky.
Freaky deaky.
The story of Old Union Church and Graveyard. First, I'm going to talk about Old Union Church and Graveyard, which is in my hometown of Livingston. One of my best friend's parents actually live like 2 minutes down the road from this place. It's really close if you are familiar, you'll know where I'm talking about, but it's really close to a community in Livingston called Hillham. And so I've driven by this place so many times going to her house, and we've walked by it a handful of times, just like walking around as you do in high school when you don't have anything else to do and you're at a friend's house. Some information for everyone. According to their Facebook page, so this is a log cabin church. It was built in the 1830s, and the cemetery or graveyard has over 452 graves. As a side note, I'm pretty sure a cemetery can only be considered a graveyard if there's a church attached to it, so that's why I'm calling it a graveyard. But also, I may use cemetery in here if I forgot to use graveyard. So there isn't really, like, a good answer or, like, explanation for the cause of why the place is haunted, except the fact that the graveyard sits right next to the building.
Yeah.
And that
there's dead people in there.
Yeah, so automatically haunted. That's all you need to know. Yeah, haunted. And according to Shadowland's Haunted Places website, lights can be seen coming through cracks in the doors and the windows while no one is there, and sounds of a piano being played can occasionally be heard. And then an article in one of our local newspapers, I found a snippet of the newspaper article, but I couldn't tell which one it was. I don't know if it was the Herald-Citizen or the Overton County News. So, no source on that. But they talk about a man walking near the church one evening, and he heard this beautiful harp-like music being played, which is interesting because I can't believe anyone could have afforded to have put a harp in that church.
Nope.
Harps are very fancy.
Yep.
And then when he tried getting closer to pass by and hear it a little bit better, it faded, and he only heard, quote, a rustling sound as of wings. And it said that these and similar experiences at the church were usually an omen of a death to come in the family. And according to the same article, the man who heard the harp music actually heard it 2 weeks before his baby died.
Aww.
So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what the article said. Sad. And then another story talks about a man that's coming home after being gone for a long time. And when he's passing the cemetery, he meets his childhood friend Mary near the graveyard, and he talked to her for like a really long time. They hadn't seen each other in a while. And then later when he's home and he's telling people, oh, hey, like I ran into Mary on the way into town and we spoke. People told him that she'd actually been dead for 2 months.
Great.
Yes. And then the last story that I could find is from the Herald Citizen. Shout out our local paper. And she went around and collected stories basically from old timers who had heard different things about the church and everything. And she was told a story about a man named Cordell who had stopped by the church one night to take shelter from the rain. And while he was in the church, of course, lightning was flashing. Classic. And he thought he saw an 8-foot tall figure sitting in a front pew ahead of him.
Okay.
So he promptly got out of there. My only experience with the church, because it has, well, in the past at least, I don't know if this is still true now, it has had police presence there because people try to go at all hours of the night and disturb the peace. There's houses near it, so got to be respectful. But I went there in high school after a football game with some friends. But I didn't actually have any experiences. I think we were all just already creeped out because, one, it was dark, and we knew where we were, and we knew the stories and everything. And so I haven't had anything happen to me there. My dad has investigated there before. I can't remember right off the top of my head if he's had any, like, very distinguishable experiences. I don't think it's anything crazy. I really think a lot of it's probably just because there's a graveyard attached to it. But it's a pretty spooky location. I mean, it's a log cabin. It's in a pretty remote part. Hillham's a pretty small community, and it's kind of out in the boonies. So it's a little creepy out there anyway. I will say there's a bridge somewhere near it. It's a very tiny bridge. There's not much to it at all. And my friend whose parents live near the church, she was coming home to visit her parents one night, and as she was passing over the bridge, something ran out in front of her in the road. And she's not the kind of person that exaggerates or just tells things to have a story to tell. But she said she wasn't sure what it was, but it was weird, and it was super late at night. She was driving home, and she was in college, so this has been in the last... When were we in college? Less than 10 years ago. So, yeah, spooky place. It's very dark out there. There's not a ton of street lights. I don't know. It's pretty creepy. Like, during the day, it doesn't seem scary at all, of course, but at night, it has a vibe.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, the creature running out in front of the car... I love creatures.
Yes.
Ooh. One time I accidentally hit a coyote on the interstate.
That's sad.
I was going 80 miles per hour.
Oh my gosh.
And it left a permanent skid mark on my Mini Cooper.
I can believe that. That's very fast.
It scared the absolute shit out of me. The story of the Bell Witch. The Bell Witch is probably the most famous Tennessee ghost story, and it's honestly probably not even a ghost story because the person involved was not dead yet. But not only is it a famous Tennessee story, it's just a famous early ghost story from really early Republic America. Because it happened in the 1820s, and Tennessee only became a state in the 1790s, so we only had about 30 years going for us there. So all of the families involved with the Bell Witch were settlers. They were frontiers people. And what's interesting to me, I did not know this, but the Bell family were actually pretty prominent in North Carolina, where they came from originally. And so much so that people don't really understand why they would move, because not only did they cross the Appalachian Mountains to do so in a, horse and buggy, they went all the way to Middle Tennessee, because this happened in what's now Adams, Tennessee, near Nashville. And back home in North Carolina, they were pretty well made. The thing about John Bell, I found out, the patriarch of the Bell family, he was actually excommunicated from the Baptist church that they attended in North Carolina, which I didn't know that Baptists did that, but apparently they do. And the reason given in the record book of that period was that he was accused of usury, which means that he would lend you money, but the interest that he wanted back was like 5 and 6 times the amount that he lent you. And he would hold you to that number. Like, he would threaten you for it. He was a shuckster and a scam artist and a liar. And no one wanted him in town anymore because he was kind of a big bully. Mm-hmm. And so he picked up and left, and he moved to Tennessee, where all of this land was quote-unquote totally available. There wasn't anyone on it or anything. And he settled in Adams, and life was pretty good for the family. The farm, I think it was well over 120 acres of land. And he was a really successful farmer, and he was setting up his family to have this pretty substantial, like, legacy business-wise. The family did own slaves, as was, you know, the custom at the time, the practice. And one of the main reasons why, I think, the Bell Witch attacked him was over a business dealing over a slave. So, there is a woman that is brought up very frequently when talking about the Bell Witch, and that is the woman who was cursing them, and that is Kate Batts. And this was a woman who was living with her husband and her children on their frontier farm. Kate Batts was a neighbor of the Bell family, and her husband, like most men of the time, was the sole provider for the family. And when he sustained an injury farming, he was totally disabled, and he could no longer work at all. So the only thing that the family could do was sell most, if not all, of their land. And in comes John Bell, who buys it for, like, dirt cheap, like an insulting amount of money, because he knows he can take advantage of poor people. And the Batts family, even though they're poor, you shouldn't feel bad for them, because they were slave owners. And the Batts family owned this mother and daughter. The little girl was probably about, like, unfortunately, like 10 or 11 years old at the time. And they were talking about selling her. And John Bell said, I will pay for her now, but I want her to stay with her mother until she, you know, is old enough, which in his eyes is probably about 14 or 15.
Yeah.
And so the day comes, and Mr. Batts says, this is my slave, and she is a woman now and can do much more labor than she could as a child. She's worth more. You owe me more money. And John Bell said, nope, I already paid for her. You were just keeping her for me. And takes the kid. And so here's two huge things that rub Kate Batts the wrong way. And I like to imagine that she probably did know some kooky, spooky stuff. And she could have been a witch. Because what follows in the Bell House has been recorded throughout American history as, like, honestly something genuinely prolific. Like, what happened there drew the attention of people all over the country. Even the president of the United States at one time, Andrew Jackson, before he was president, he stayed there. But it was a major draw to come to BFE, Adams, Tennessee, the middle of nowhere, to be in the house where these events were taking place. And it really started with John's daughter. And she was about 15 or 16 at the time, but she would hear scratching and voices. One thing about the Bell House haunting, there were so many instances of people saying that they would hear full sentences from this spirit. And the spirit would be very upfront in her answers to these questions. Like, it was very bold what this thing was doing in the house. And it was very physical as well. And, I mean, it would bully the shit out of this girl to the point where one day she woke up unable to move because it had tied her hair in a knot to her bedpost. And, you know, here she is alone in her room hearing these scratches like some animal is loose inside. She's screaming for her parents to help her, for her siblings to come and free her, untangle her from the bed. And one reason why I think it really was a witch is because there were so many appearances of animals and unnatural animals at that. I want to say that there was something that looked kind of like a mule that had basically the head of like a rabbit. Like, it had these really long ears. And there was another creature that had the face of a man, but it looked more like a wolf, like its body. And, you know, other than those extreme cases, there were always birds watching the house, or, you know, like a fox would come in and out and just not act like a fox. But there were always voices in the house, and the voice identified itself as Kate. I am Kate. Has been recorded in the original diary of John Bell, which who knows if he's just blaming it on this mean, angry lady that he doesn't like who lives next door. But honestly, it makes sense to me. Like, a lot of the ghost stories, not ghost stories, but a lot of the stories that I have heard about witches, especially in the South, is that they really do use familiars.
Yeah.
I've heard one story where somewhere else in Tennessee, closer to East Tennessee, there was a man whose neighbor was this woman that was older and kind of kept to herself, but people had accused her of witchcraft. They weren't, you know, in her face about it, but they knew, like, don't hang around her for long because she'll probably do something to you. And he had, like, crossed property lines or something, like, maybe stolen something that was hers, taken, like, some animal that didn't belong to him, something like that. And he finds himself in his yard one day facing down this wolf, and he shoots it in the leg. And the next, like, day or two, he gets word that the old woman in the house down the road died of a shot to the leg. Because, you know, she had taken that form to potentially hurt him, whatever, which I think is cool as hell. But the Bell family what's crazy about them is they had other people in the house constantly. Like, there's not a whole lot going on in the 1820s in Middle Tennessee, especially when your closest neighbor is like half a mile away. And, you know, the town knew about it. They were in and out all the time, hearing it, seeing things. And one day, attention kind of shifted away from the daughter to the father. He started to get sick, almost like he had been poisoned by something. And there was kind of this understanding that whatever was cursing this family was going to kill him. And finally, someone just asked the spirit one day, "Why do you want John Bell dead?" And the recorded answer was, "He just needs killing."
Well,
which goes so hard.
I mean,
perfectly fine answer to me. Yeah. So he dies. He died from like some horrible illness that was close to being poisoned, whatever. And the daughter grows up a little bit, and she's thinking about marrying her neighbor, this guy. I think his name was Billy or something. And she's walking home one day when this girl that is like younger than her, probably like 12 or 13, is hanging from a tree by her hands. She's way up there in this branch. She's just hanging there, looking down at her, emotionless. And she asks her, "What are you doing? Who are you?" And the child basically gave her a warning: you do not need to marry this man, because bad luck will follow you. And a lot of people think that that was a warning from the witch. She marries the guy anyway, and all of her children die within like the first 2 years of them being born. So like none of her kids lived. It was a very bad match in that regard. But the Bell Witch would come and go for like well over 100 years, and people would hear her saying, "I will be back in 7 years," and then she'd come back, and "I will be back in 135 years," and then she came back. So she's just hanging around. I think potentially there's other evidence to suggest that honestly she might have just been like an old spirit of the land that did not enjoy some shitty dude hanging out there. Because at one time someone was talking to the spirit, and it replied that it had been there for millions and millions of years before anyone else had been there. I have been here. So, who knows? Who knows what it is? But could you imagine being a pioneer,
no,
knowing that you will be completely isolated and that the only things that you have with you is what you bring, and then experiencing that?
No, I could not have been a pioneer. Listen, I have watched Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah.
Everything bad that can happen happened to the Ingalls family.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was probably just like that for everyone. So, I would not.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I think one reason why settlers to Tennessee had the success that they did, a large number of them were Revolutionary War soldiers who were awarded land. And that was the instance with my own family, the Perry family. One guy came here after the Revolutionary War. He served in some Virginia outfit. And we have, I think it was probably his granddaughter, but she wrote down for like a family reunion dinner, she gave a little speech about her grandfather and settling this place near Knoxville. And it talks about the times where, you know, there would be a bear in the yard, and mountain lions, and wolves, and you just have to deal with it. Like, could you imagine?
Well, and just, I mean, I don't have a ton of evidence to back this up, but in general, I think people were just also much more superstitious back then. And so, things that we would see today and be like, oh yeah, whatever, there's a bird in that tree, they'd be like, oh my God, like, this is it. Like, this is bad. Like, things are about to get really bad.
An ill omen.
Exactly. Yeah, especially if it happened to be a crow or an owl or something like that. So I feel like just the lack of information makes things so much more scary. I mean, you think about, like, you go somewhere and, like, it's unfamiliar to you. Like, you're already like, oh God, like, or at least I am, like, the anxiety of, like, not
100%.
knowing my surroundings, like, not knowing where things are, and then also having to create my home, find food. I'm probably gonna have kids, and I have to figure out how to keep them alive, as well as whatever animals that I need to help me do my work and stuff.
And then when I get typhoid fever, how am I going to deal with that?
It's going to feel like a curse.
Yes.
It's going to feel like a curse.
Absolutely. It's just a curse to be alive.
Yeah. But also, I mean, going back to, you know, all the animals that you mentioned in the story, I mean, even in Salem during the witch trials, I mean, the witches there were thought to have familiars, and a dog was actually killed. One dog was killed in the Salem witch trials. It was accused of, I don't know if it was accused of being a familiar or being a witch, but they killed a dog. So, yeah.
If you are not a witch, transform before our eyes, devil.
And it, like, barked, probably.
Don't lick me. I'm not your friend. Man, I know that it would not be the dog that was killed, but I'm just picturing, like, a golden retriever that's just, like, happy to be there.
I don't know why, but I'm like a fox terrier.
Aww.
And they're so cute.
Just
I don't know.
a little guy.
That's like the dog that immediately comes to mind for me.
That's so sad.
Because I'm like, they're the cutest dogs ever, and I'm just imagining this little innocent creature and these, like, angry Puritans.
Could you imagine getting to that point where you are so fucked up and crazy out of your mind that you're like, yes, this makes sense. This dog is magic.
Sometimes I fear we're headed there again.
Oh, absolutely. No, well, you know, these hurricanes that are coming through as we speak.
Seeding.
Yeah, the cloud seeding from the government.
Yeah. The government are a bunch of witches.
Woo! Witch Hunt 2024. Woo! MAGA! Drain the swamp!
The story of Crazy George's Bridge. So, Crazy George's Bridge is on Brotherton Mountain. And if you're not familiar with that area, there's really not much out there. But it's between Cookeville and Monterey. And so the legend says that a railway worker named George had a drinking problem and was walking near the tracks one night. And then he somehow managed to fall onto the tracks and was decapitated by the train. And so now his ghost is supposed to wander the tracks with a lantern looking for his lost head.
Ooh.
So I guess he's like our version of the Headless Horseman.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so it's got a bit of like an urban legend element to it, pretty similar to some other urban legends, but people say that if you drive to the bridge and turn off your car, it's not supposed to start again. And then I've also heard that if you drive like a manual transmission car and park there and put it in neutral, then ghostly hands are supposed to push you along the bridge.
Ooh.
So spooky. And then again, I think that's just like a variety of urban legends being mixed together, but it's still fun. It's like our local take on it. And then another story, which I had not actually ever heard this one until I was like doing research on this. But it says that if you call George's name 3 times, he'll appear on the bridge. So, some local sources have said that they have debunked the legend of Crazy George, and that the supposed true story behind this is about a guy named Norman. Very interesting name. This is not one I've run across before. And this is from the Explore Monterey tourism website. So thanks for that, guys. Yeah. So supposedly Norman was walking home from a church service at the Woodcliff Baptist Church. I don't know if this is still like an existing church. That's the one they mentioned in the story. And this supposedly happened in 1931. He was offered a place to stay overnight by the night watchman, by the railway tracks. And this guy was possibly named Jerry Holloway. That's a name that come up.
That is 100% a Tennessee man's name.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that in a separate source. So, instead of having to walk the tracks, he's like, hey, you can stay here tonight. Just take it easy. Because he was like a little tipsy, perhaps, even though he had just come from church. And so Norman declined and continued on his way home. He told Jerry Holloway that he wanted to have one last home-cooked breakfast from his mom before he got married the next week. So he wanted to be with his mama. But he did not make it home. The next morning, he was not at the breakfast table. And the night watchman, before he started his next shift, was walking part of the tracks and found Norman's body and ran to tell the church and his betrothed, who was also conveniently at the church.
I mean, where else are you going to be?
I mean, there probably weren't a lot of options.
Nope.
And his bride-to-be appeared to be distraught. She supposedly fainted on the spot when she heard this news. But a few weeks later, she got married to another man.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So this caused a lot of rumors to fly, and eventually all the different variations of the story being told is supposedly what created the Crazy George myth. So my own personal experience at the bridge, because I've been there a handful of times. So I've been, usually when I have been to it, it's been at night, because of course, you're supposed to go at night. But one instance in particular is memorable for me. So in college, me and 3 people that I was friends with, we had nothing to do. We were off work that night. And we were like, we've never been to Crazy George's Bridge. Let's go. And so one of them volunteered to drive. Conveniently, he was the only one of us who drove a manual transmission car. So he was like, yeah, I'm going to drive. And none of the rest of us knew how to drive. So his car. So he was the only one getting us there and out in that car. So we got there, and he parked in the middle of the bridge, and he was doing the thing where, oh God, the car won't start, and like messing with us and stuff. And we walked around for just a little bit, and they were like, okay, we probably need to go, because if people hear us out here, they're going to call the cops on us, because it's also a residential area. There's a lot of people that have houses near there. And we go to get in the car to leave, and the car actually won't start. And at first we thought he was kidding again, because he'd done it like several times while we had been there. But the car actually would not start. Mm-hmm. And so we were stuck in the middle of this bridge. I don't remember what time of night it was. It was probably close to midnight. But we were stuck there. And I don't know if there was like a police patrolling the area already, or if someone in one of the houses near the bridge heard us and called the cops because they were like, what are these kids doing here? I don't know, but a police car did eventually come up on us pretty quickly after that happened, and he helped us push the car up off the bridge into this like gravel pull-off area that's really close to the bridge. And I I don't know if he was just trying to, like, freak us out, or if he was probably just trying to freak us out. But he made the comment, if you knew what I knew, you would not be here at night. And so, in my mind, I'm like, this guy, he's just trying to spook us a little bit. But then also I was like, what does that mean? And anyway.
I'd like to know.
Yeah. And so, anyway, him and I think another cop ended up coming as backup or whatever. They drove us to a gas station, and my friend who drove us there, his parents had to come pick us up, so that was really embarrassing. Like I said, I think the guy was just joking, but I will say, from what I have heard from other people and what I've, like, seen online and stuff, there have been rumors that there have been, like, occult groups, like, do, like, practices and rituals by the bridge. People have, unfortunately, found dead animals, specifically cats, by the bridge. And I'm sure some of it is because it's a busy-ish road. Like, people drive over it regularly. So it could be that. But then also, you can't help but think, like, people are weird. They're going to do weird stuff. So, but yeah, there's been rumors that people have performed rituals there, that they've seen symbols on the bridge. Which, if you drive over the bridge, it's very obvious that you're on it because people have spray painted their names all over it. And so there's all kinds of symbols and stuff anyway. It's literally covered in spray paint. But yeah, people have supposedly seen figures standing in circles near the bridge. And then, of course, the tracks still run under the bridge. And it's mostly just wooded area on both sides. So it's pretty spooky there at night, I will say. And then another instance, this didn't happen, I guess, to me, but a few years ago, if you guys are familiar with the Randonautica app, they got really popular on TikTok for a while. I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked. I think it gave you coordinates, and you were supposed to just drive to the coordinates, and it was, like, near you, and there was supposed to be, like, a paranormal element to it. And so me and, like, some friends were doing that one night. And then I was like, hey, have you guys ever been to Crazy George's Bridge? And they said no, they're not from Cookeville or the surrounding area. So I was like, we should go. You know, it's just kind of spooky, something dumb to do. And so we were driving up there. It was at night, of course, and it was a little foggy. It had rained. And as we're getting closer to the bridge, we pass a really bad car accident. Like, someone... So when you're driving... The closer you get to the bridge, there's an area where if you're going up that road, on to the right of where you're driving, there's a drop-off. And someone had flipped their car and were nearly, like, on the edge of, like, falling over, like, almost a bluff. And the police were already there, thankfully, so we didn't have to worry about, like, them not getting help or anything. But we continued on to the bridge. Nothing else happened. We came back home. But it's just interesting to me that out of all the places that I've been, I have two very, like, memorable, like, distinct memories of things that have happened near that bridge. So, I don't know. I mean, the car didn't start.
Yeah.
So,
okay, the cloaked figures.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the same for you in this area, but in Roane County in Rockwood, Tennessee specifically, there is a history, at least back in the 80s and 90s, and I think there was, like, a little bit of a resurgence in, like, 2010, 2011, I think is whenever I remember, but there were some devil worshippers down there, and my granny actually had an encounter with two of them because she was a nurse. She worked as a nurse for, like, over 30 years, and one day these two kids come in, and they're probably about 20 years old, and they look like shit. Like, their skin looks weird, like it's, like, weirdly dry and pale, and like, they just look ill. And they came to get some medical help. And they were some boys from Rockwood that rumors had been going around that they had been participating in these, like, black mass ceremony type things. And that they would drink the blood of animals that they had killed. Well, Granny was the one who blood tested them. And it turns out that those boys had mange because they had been drinking the blood of dogs that they had been killing and sacrificing. So that devil dog blood got them. And whenever I was in middle school, one of my friends moved to this more rural part of town. And on the road to their house, he remembered his dad stopping in the middle of the road because someone had walked a horse out there and slit its throat and killed it.
Oh my God.
And just, like, let it bleed out. And so that was, like, a part of something that someone had wanted to do. So that's great. And they apparently did not... Either they didn't like them in the neighborhood, or they had been using the property for rituals before and kind of just kept showing up whenever they could to kill things in their barn. My friend, unfortunately, had a cat that they let outside once, and they got a hold of it and killed it. But, yeah, devil worshippers are real. And they're hanging out, and they're being all white trashy about it, and getting mange and shit. I don't want to run into them.
No. That's the mange, though.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah, like... Also, a whole horse?
Yeah.
I mean, like, don't get me wrong, it's bad, any animal. I hate that, obviously, but... A horse in the middle of the road? Like...
Yeah. Like, I wonder what that meant to them.
I can't even imagine.
Speaking of the Headless Horseman, can we talk about how it was, like, based on a real dude?
Yeah.
And, he was a Hessian mercenary.
Yeah.
Who fought in the American Revolution. And, like, what's crazy to me, the Hessians, they're from what is today modern-day Germany.
Right.
And they were involved in constant wars for, like, well over 50 years in that region, trying to settle, like where countries are drawing their lines. And, like, war changes people.
Oh, yeah.
And it's true to this day that, like, you can make soldiering a profession.
Yeah.
And for some dudes, like, you go and you serve, 3 and 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you can't do anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of these Hessian men. They had the opportunity to just go home. But they wanted work, and they wanted to continue doing that. Specifically. And they were willing to travel over the Atlantic Ocean to do so for the British. So, like, imagine seeing this dude who is a certified hired badass on horseback coming for your shit. When suddenly a cannonball hits him square in the head, and he doesn't have a head anymore. Supposedly that's what happened. Like, a bunch of soldiers saw this happen on a battlefield, and that image was so visceral. I could only imagine, like, of course a legend is going to come out of that.
Yeah, I think I'd be like going home and be like, you know what I saw?
Yeah. Like, the human body is so fragile in so many ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, whenever a, 35-pound ball of lead is coming at you at over 100 miles per hour, I think I'd be headless too. The story of Kingston Courthouse. I think it's one of the few states in the country, I think it's still just a few states that do it, that offer free community college to high school graduates. And Tennessee Promise is what it's called. Promise. In order to secure that scholarship, you have to give up, I want to say, at least 15 or 20 hours for volunteer work.
Yeah.
And I decided to do mine at the Kingston Courthouse because it's the historical heart of the town. The historian that works there, Robert Bailey, is this very, sweet, curmudgeonly, but not kind of guy. He's really cool. They used to have a cat there that would walk around, and the courthouse in Kingston is special for two reasons. One, not so savory, but the first reason is that it's one of 6 remaining antebellum courthouses in the state. Most of them were burned in the Civil War. Yay, Reconstruction. And basically, it's really gorgeous. It was built in the 1850s. It's decently preserved. There's definitely some wear and tear on the building, but it's a really cool structure. It has 3 floors, I think, including the attic, which was where I was working some. But the other reason why it's important to the state's history is because Kingston was the capital of Tennessee for one day. And we did that to cheat Native Americans out of their land. So, yay! Yay! Cool! Anyway, I volunteered there for a while, and it was really cool. The place, it's always very quiet. Mr. Bailey does not listen to music or anything while he works. He is just in there in this quiet room with his assistant. I forgot her name. She was really nice too. But it's just shelves and shelves and shelves of records of everything that has ever happened in Kingston ever, as well as people's obituaries, just anyone that has ever lived in town. There is a fragment of you somewhere in this courthouse, which I think is cool. But because so many things have happened in this courthouse, and some people were sentenced to death there, as well as I want to say that originally there was a little jail room there just to hold people over until they could either be taken out of town or it was just a very simple crime. I knew that the courthouse was probably haunted. Most people in town say that and agree with that statement. One thing about the courthouse is you kind of just know that you're not alone wherever you are in there, but it's not threatening or anything. It's almost like you walk into a room and you didn't realize that there was someone else in there, and you're just oh, hey. The attic especially is where most activity has been caught on camera and audio and stuff like that. But the whole building, things will happen there, and it's just interesting. Most of it is so small that it really could be anything, or it could just be me hearing things. But it would happen so much that it's okay, what is this? I would be sitting downstairs organizing files, and I would just hear people talking in another room, or at least just like somewhere close by, but I could never make out any words or anything, just like someone's tone, like just hearing a regular conversation, and I wouldn't even really be thinking about it. And then it would go kind of quiet again, and I'd be like, yeah, we're the only ones here. So, who was that? I don't know what that was. And my, like, second to last day there is whenever I finally went up into the attic to organize some stuff. And Mr. Bailey genuinely asked me, he was like, you don't have to go up there because it makes people uncomfortable because you won't be by yourself up there. And I said, I don't mind. I don't think that they're going to do anything to me for looking through these filing cabinets. And what was crazy, I had a thought. I was like, okay, so I'm going to the obituary room. I bet I could find my grandfather's obituary. And he is someone that died when I was like 3 months old. I never really got to meet him or speak to him. But, and I, it like came to my mind, like immediately. I was like, I bet he would be here, and so would my great-grandmother's things and all this stuff. And, I get up there, and I realize that the drawers do not have the alphabet on the outside of the drawer, because that would make too much sense. And Mr. Bailey is so used to just being by himself and doing everything himself that he just remembers where things are. So he sends me up there not even telling me, like, which end to start on. But the drawer that I opened had the Perrys in it. The very first drawer that I opened. And there was my grandfather's obituary. And I read about him, and it mentioned, leaves a granddaughter, Molly Perry, and I was like, that's so crazy. And then I was up there for the rest of the time, like an hour and a half, and I did hear what sounded like footsteps, just like off in another room. Nothing crazy. I get a lot of things about, like, doorways. Like, if I feel like I'm feeling like a presence in a room, it's almost always as if I am being looked at from a doorway. I don't know why. Or a window. Maybe it's because it is kind of like a portal to a room. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I felt like I was not alone, like, a certain percent of the time, and I just kept looking back at the door that was open to the hallway and just, like, knowing that someone was there or had walked by, someone out there. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But it's a really interesting place, and you can just go anytime you want and ask Mr. Bailey questions, and he would love to help you because he loves history and he likes it when people care. So please show up. Please hang out with him. He's nice. They used to have a cat named Miss Pumpkin, I think.
Oh, that's so cute.
I don't know if Miss Pumpkin is still there. But she was very rotund, and I enjoyed her greatly. That's my tale.
Yeah, I love that, because support your local historical places where people are just trying to do a good deed and keep people educated. And then also, I feel like, you mentioned it's as old as it is, and it was not burned down, so it's an existing structure. Mm-hmm. I think it's called, like, there's this idea of, like, residual haunting, so it's almost like the energy or whatever is there is kind of caught in what it did day to day. And so it's almost like Groundhog Day. Like, like you wake up and do the same things every day. And that's kind of like what these, like, spirits or the energy or whatever does. And you have to wonder in places like that where there is so much history and so many people have come and gone and did certain things or whatever, if that energy is still there in some capacity, just kind of doing its thing, like it's day to day.
Yeah. Especially if maybe there was someone who worked there, 40 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time that you're dedicating to this space that isn't even your home.
Yeah. But it's still significant in some way.
Yeah.
And at least that you spent so much time there, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's cool, though.
Yeah. It's also cool, I think, that the courtroom, the main courtroom, which is on the second floor, is this, like, pale green color.
Yeah.
Like, everything is painted green in there, which I think was just a trend for the time.
Yeah.
But, yeah. It kind of makes me think of, I forget what it was called.
I think I know where you're going with this.
In Philadelphia.
Oh, no. Never mind.
In Philadelphia, where the Declaration of Independence was drafted, that room, it's like that same color green.
Okay.
Which, that building was built probably 100 years before that one, but it makes me think of that room.
Yeah. I was going to say, I thought you were going, talking about paint. In the South, particularly, a lot of people used to paint their porches, specifically like the underside of the roof of the porch, blue.
Yeah.
And it's called haint paint.
Oh.
And the idea for that is if a bad spirit comes to your house, the blue on the roof is supposed to distract it and make it think it needs to go elsewhere because it's supposed to like resemble the sky. And that's where I was going with that one. But
that's so interesting.
It is, and it's kind of like similar, or the I think they have a more precise name, but the bottle trees that you see in a lot of, especially older people's yards. The bottles are supposed to trap, again, bad spirits, and they get stuck in the bottle, and then when the sun comes up, it's supposed to make them vanish, because it's not nighttime anymore. So, you see bottle trees, they're usually,
so cool.
They're kind of like, usually like a little scraggly, like scrubby tree, or like just a limb that someone is like stuck in their yard, and it'll be covered, and it's usually blue or green bottles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a house in Kingston, by Kingston Elementary School, that has a bottle tree.
Yeah. There's a community really close to where my parents live. A ton of older people live out that way, and a lot of them have the bottle trees in their yards.
Man, I want to do that. If only I owned my own home.
Now that's impossible.
The spookiest thing
is
the housing market. The story of the witches' cemetery. And so this one actually kind of piggybacks off of Crazy George's Bridge because it's close to it. They don't have like necessarily anything in common other than proximity. So the witches' cemetery is like maybe, I think, a half mile, if that, up the road from Crazy George's Bridge. And it's in a forest clearing that's up a gravel path. So it has a little bit of a road going through it. It's actually called Stamp Cemetery. It's a family cemetery. And the graves there are super old. And a lot of people call them witch graves just because they look a little different. So they're actually tent, or some people call them comb graves. And so they were used really commonly in the 1800s, and they're shaped exactly how they sound. They look like tents. And then they're supposed to have been used to prevent the sunken ground from exposing people's coffins, and also to keep animals away. So you don't have to have a pest problem. And then they were also thought to kind of deter grave robbers. So I don't know how common of a practice that was around here back then, but that was supposed to be another use for them, was to keep grave robbers away. And then I actually found a story from the Crawford Alumni Center on campus at Tech.
Wow.
And so they used to have this student organization called the Baptist Student Union, or the BSU. And I don't know if this was like a church-affiliated thing or if it was like an early fraternity. I'm not really sure. I couldn't find a lot of information on that. But they used to take freshmen to the cemetery as a form of initiation, and then they would tell them like their version of the story of the the cemetery. And their story, according to tradition, they would tell them that earlier in the century, a coven of witches were supposed to have lived in a boarding house that later became the Kappa Sigma fraternity house. Because, of course. And as a mark of their belief, the witches painted a pentagram on the exterior of the house. And at this point in the initiation process, the BSU members would drive by the Kappa Sigma house and show the freshmen the pentagram. And then they would drive off on the long, dark mountain road toward the cemetery. And then it was said that in the story, as the witches died, they were all buried in the cemetery, and their headstones were marked with the same pentagram that was painted on the then boarding house, later fraternity house. Of the dozens of witches' graves, only 2 had a star pointed, or a pentagram pointed upward. The stars pointing down were said to be the marks of bad witches. So,
I love that for them.
I know. And I don't know if it means bad as in, like, evil, or bad as in, like, they were crap witches. Like, you're bad at being a witch. I don't know.
Should have tried harder.
You didn't pass this one.
Which, honestly, that is very sorority coded.
Yeah, so maybe that's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But, so, Kappa Sigma confirmed that a pentagram was etched on a side door of their house, but what many people didn't realize was that the symbol is actually part of their badge design. So it had to be there anyway.
Aww.
So, sorry to ruin that one for everybody. And then Stamp Cemetery, like I mentioned, it's a family cemetery, and the pentagrams or stars are probably just the way that Mr. Stamps would sign his name. It also could have been a Masonic symbol, since the stones were clearly created by skilled craftsmen. So yeah, little bit of campus lore.
That's interesting.
I know, I had actually never heard that story before.
A boarding house of witches.
That later became a fraternity house.
I mean, it happens.
You know.
That's so funny.
Repurpose your boarding houses.
I can't remember for sure, but isn't it a thing, like, the reason why most college campuses in Tennessee don't have sorority houses, or, like, the ones that they do have were built in, like, the 80s and 90s because there was, like, laws on the books for, like, a long time that if a certain number of women lived together, it was considered like a brothel.
Yes, I have heard that.
God.
So.
Women can't do things together?
No.
Disgusting.
They're either witches or prostitutes if they gather in groups.
There's not a single man living in this property? That's impossible.
Unheard of.
The story of Skinned Tom. In Maryville, there is an old folk tale about a man named Skinned Tom. And Tom lived around the 1920s. And the story goes that he was basically a rogue and a rake.
I was literally thinking, a rake.
And he was quite handsome. And he liked to use his money and his looks on women. He loved women, and he especially liked women who were already married. And he liked to mess around. And the story also goes that whenever Tom would pull into town in his fancy Model T, there were a lot of shotgun weddings to follow, because he would pull into town, get a bunch of girls pregnant, and leave. So a lot of people hated this guy, like a lot. And one day he saw the wrong woman, basically. And this woman, we will call her Geraldine. Geraldine was a good Christian woman, and she was married, and she had no desire to get mixed up with Tom, because she knew what Tom was. He did not hide that fact, but he continued to pursue her and would, quote-unquote, accidentally run into her places, at church, in town, and it got to a point where finally, she fell for him, like, really hard. She fell in love with him. And her husband was, whatever job he did, he was not in town all the time. So there were large chunks of time where, she could send the kids off to school and they would just hang out all day and screw. So that's cool. But one day they got sloppy in more ways than one. Hey! And the town gossip in Maryville saw them on a lover's lane, which I think actually there is a road in Maryville that this happened on called Lover's Lane. And she, as soon as this husband gets back from this week away for work, she tells the guy, "Hey, your wife is cheating on you. Just wanted to let you know. Okay, thanks, bye." And this guy is like, "No way. My wife, Geraldine, she is a gem. She would not do this to me. I have faith in my wife, and I believe in our marriage vows, and blah, blah, blah. So what I'm going to do is be really, really creepy and tell her that I'm going out of town again for a week. But in actuality, I'm going to rent a room at a nearby motel and follow her around town to make sure that she's not having sex with this dude named Tom." Well, he watches her send the kids down the street to school, goes back in the house, and not but 10 minutes later, this guy Tom pulls up in his Model T, picks her up, and takes her to Lover's Lane. And this pisses the guy off so much, because, he's a rational man. He follows them to Lover's Lane, and because this guy, they called him Tom because he was like a big tomcat. He was like a big, uncut cat that was walking around screwing everybody's wife. He decided that he was going to skin him like a cat. And so this guy, pulls up beside their car and yanks this guy out of the seat and, basically beats him senseless. Sends his wife, running into the woods. And he takes off his clothes and he starts skinning him alive. He takes a knife that he has with him and starts cutting his skin away, flaying him alive. And he bleeds out and dies from this. And he hung the man's skin on the door of his Model T. And he looks up in this blood rage and goes after his wife and kills her too. And don't know what happened to that guy, who I believe is the true villain of this story. Well, there's more than one. But, like, in a contest of villains, I'm gonna say that the guy who decided to skin a man alive is probably pretty evil.
That's fair.
But the story goes, and there's even a little song with it. Hang on. Let me find the song.
Oh my goodness.
There's a song that goes along with the story that goes, "Have you seen the ghost of skinned Tom? Long white bones with the skin all gone." Because if you go to this lover's lane in Maryville, Tennessee, and it's pretty niche, you're cheating on your partner, Skin Tom will show up, this skeletal figure with his skin all gone, his eyes unblinking, staring at you, bleeding profusely, will come up and tell you, hey, cut that out, and try to kill you with his big old knife. Which, you know, if I had told this tale, I don't think that Tom would have the knife, because he wasn't the guy that had the knife. You know, that was the husband.
Yeah.
But, I guess the knife makes it spookier and more threatening. But, this is apparently like a pretty famous thing. And, so much so that, there was a guy that took this girl he was seeing in the 70s to this lover's lane. And, they started, like, making out. They were parking, if you will. And, this voice started singing this song about long white bones with the skin all gone. And they see this man, this bloody man, standing in front of their car in their headlights, pointing at them, like, accusingly, with this knife, but more specifically at this girl. And she said, she starts screaming. She says, "I'm going to divorce him. It's going to happen. I'm not going to stay married to him. You can leave. Please leave." And they book it out of there. They drive away. And the guy's like, "What are you talking about, getting divorced?" And she goes, "Well, I'm technically still married to my husband. And I just hadn't told you yet because I wasn't sure how you would feel about it." But, yeah.
Plot twist.
Plot twist. So, imagine screaming at some, like, bloody dude that shows up that you are going to get a divorce. That's how you free yourself. It's to say that I am getting a divorce.
I mean, I guess it worked if he didn't follow him.
Yeah.
So, I don't think I've ever heard a positive story about something that happened at a lover's lane.
No.
So maybe just don't go to those.
It's almost like there's secretly stories about how you shouldn't have sex out of marriage.
Ooh.
Ooh. What's it called? When you don't have sex.
Abstinence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Abstinence is the key. Ooh, do not have sex.
You have to sign the contract that they make you do at school.
We never had to do any of that. Honestly, whenever it got to the point where we were supposed to talk about sex in my health class, my hand to God, Mrs. Lane printed out the chapters of the book and gave us those, and she was like, you can read them if you want, but you don't have to.
But you don't have to.
And then she did not cover any of it.
I mean, more power to her, because there are statistics out there that say that that stuff doesn't really work anyway. So,
yeah.
Just make sure your kid has anxiety and then you don't have to worry about it.
Exactly. Make sure they're a big nerd who's scared of everything.
Who has crippling anxiety.
Yeah. And low self-esteem.
Then you're fine. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
You won't be dealing with that for years.
Yeah, it's fine. It'll totally be worth it.
Well, these were all good ones.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me for our Spooktacular story hour. That was probably closer to 2.
Well, more content for everybody.
Yeah. That's what they were screaming for.
I knew they were waiting.
Begging.
They were like, an extra long episode with that girl again?
Hell yeah. Well, I, for one, had a blast, so thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me back. It's been fun. I could literally talk about this all day, so.
Yes. And even though this will be airing in the middle of October, have a happy Halloween! Ooh. Bye!
Good night.